The prairie was quiet that morning, as if even the wind had chosen to hold its breath. The cowboy rode slow, his horse stepping steady, the saddle creaking with every motion. He wasn't riding toward anything in particular. Men like him rarely did. His name had long been forgotten by most towns, replaced with the silence of passing years and the loneliness of the trail. The sun stretched low across the horizon, painting the land in pale gold. Dust clung to his boots, and the leather reins felt heavy in his hands. His eyes, however, carried the real weight ties that had seen too many departures. Too many graves left behind on the open land, too many goodbyes whispered to the wind. It was then, near a broken fence line in an abandoned water trough, that he noticed a figure, a boy thin, ragged, his hair tangled, his shirt torn by travel and wind. He was sitting on the ground, knees pulled tight to his chest, and in his eyes lived a question too big for someone so small. The cowboy slowed his horse. He did not speak at first, because words could startle the fragile silence between them. The boy looked up, hesitant, and then, with a voice so soft it nearly disappeared into the morning air, he asked, "Can you adopt me? Just for a day?" The cowboy froze. He had faced bandits, storms, and winters that carved the soul into stone, but nothing prepared him for that question. The boy pointed to the horse. "I can walk beside you. I just don't want to be alone today." The cowboy's throat tightened. He glanced at the empty saddle, riding just behind him, empty for so long it had become a symbol of everything he had lost: his wife, his unborn child, the home that burned down in a fire years ago. That saddle had carried nothing but memory. And now, here was a boy asking not for forever, not even for shelter, just a day. The man slid down from his horse. He crouched before the boy, studying his face, traced lines on the child's cheeks where tears had once fallen. His hands were small, calloused from work, far too heavy for his age. He had the look of someone who had walked miles with no destination, surviving on will alone. The cowboy spoke, his voice low, careful, almost breaking. "Son, a day is a short thing, but I reckon we could share it." The boy's eyes widened, not with joy, but with the relief of being seen. Slowly, the cowboy lifted him and set him on the empty saddle. The leather squeaked, and for the first time in years, that saddle carried life again. They began to ride, the horse moving steady across the plains. The boy held the saddle horn tightly, his body tense, as if afraid the moment might vanish. The cowboy watched him from the corner of his eye, remembering how it felt to guide someone small, someone who trusted without question. As they traveled, the boy began to talk in fragments, about how his father had gone west and never returned, about how his mother had grown too sick to stand, about how neighbors closed their doors when they saw him coming. He didn't cry. Children like him had already run out of tears. The cowboy listened in silence. He did not offer answers. There were none. He only offered presence, the simple weight of not being alone on the trail. When the sun rose higher, they reached the stream. The cowboy lifted the boy down, showing him how to cup water in his hands, how to feel its cold clarity against his face. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, sharing jerky and stale bread, a meal unremarkable yet sacred for the company it carried. The boy asked questions the way children do when they finally feel safe. Does it hurt when a horse kicks? Do stars fall if you whistle? Did you ever have a family? The cowboy paused at that last one, his hand stilled, his eyes sinking into places he hadn't visited in years. Then, with a heavy breath, he said, "I did, long ago." The boy nodded, not pressing further, as if he understood that some answers are too fragile to be touched. As afternoon stretched across the land, they continued riding. To any passerby, it might have looked like nothing a cowboy and a boy on a horse, but for both, it was everything. And when the day began to fold into evening, The cowboy realized something he hadn't felt in a long time, the ache of wanting a day not to end. Evening came slow on the plains. The sky turned the color of burning embers, stretched wide and endless, while shadows grew long across the land. The cowboy and the boy rode on, their horse steady under the dying light. Every so often, the boy would glance at the horizon, as if testing whether the sun could be convinced to linger just a little longer. They stopped near a patch of open grass, where the earth sloped gentle and the air smelled faintly of sage. The cowboy dismounted, tied the reins to a branch, and began to gather wood. The boy watched closely, his small hands twitching with the urge to help. Without being asked, he picked up fallen sticks, carrying them like precious offerings. Cowboy built a fire the way he always did, slow, methodical, with patience born of years alone on the trail. Sparks caught, flames grew, and soon a circle of warmth pushed back the creeping chill. The boy sat close, his face lit orange, his eyes reflecting the fire as though it had burned itself inside him. They shared another meal, simple and hard as the life they both knew. Beans warmed in a tin pot, bread softened near the flames. The boy ate quickly, almost desperately, as though every bite might vanish if he hesitated. The cowboy, noticing, slowed his own pace, not to shame the boy, but to remind him that tonight, the food would not disappear. When the fire had settled into a steady glow, the cowboy pulled his blanket from the saddlebag. He laid it across the ground, rough but wide enough for two. The boy hesitated before lying down, his small frame stiff, uncertain whether he was welcome. The cowboy nodded once, silent but firm, and the boy settled in, curling close like someone who hadn't been close to anyone in far too long. The cowboy leaned back on his elbow, gazing at the sky above them. Stars began to scatter across the dark, sharp and bright as nails hammered into black wood. The boy whispered, his voice half in wonder, half in fear. "Do they always look like that? Like they're watching us?" The cowboy let the silence stretch before answering. "They've been watching longer than we've been riding, longer than any man's lived. Maybe longer than the land itself." Spook. Boy's eyes stayed fixed on the heavens. "Do you think my mama can see me from up there?" The cowboy's chest tightened. He had no scripture, no polished words, only the truth he carried in his bones. "I think if love was strong enough to bring you into this world, it's strong enough to keep watch. She sees you." For the first time that day, the boy smiled, not wide, not bright, but enough to shift something heavy inside the cowboy. The night deepened. Coyotes sang somewhere distant, their howls carried thin across the wind. The boy's breathing slowed, steadying into the rhythm of sleep. But the cowboy did not close his eyes. He stayed awake, listening to the fire crackle, feeling the weight of the boy's presence beside him. He had spent years convinced the world had ended the day his family was taken. Yet here, under the stars, with a child who had nothing left but still asked for just a day, the world felt fragile and alive again. When morning finally broke, it was gentle. The sun rose soft and pale, laying light across the plains like a hand, brushing dust from old wood. The cowboy stirred, rubbing the stiffness from his shoulders. The boy was already awake, crouched at the stream they had stopped near, splashing his face, whispering to himself as though practicing words he wanted to say. The cowboy watched without moving. He saw in the boy's posture something painfully familiar, the way he carried loneliness like a second skin, the way he tried to hide his hunger for belonging. The cowboy recognized it because it was his own reflection. When the boy returned, he asked quietly, "Can we ride again? Just a little further?" The cowboy nodded. He lifted the boy into the saddle once more, the leather groaning under the small weight, and mounted behind him. Together, they rode into the growing light. The boy spoke more freely now, the trust between them growing like grass after rain. He talked about the sound of church bells in his town, about a dog he once had that followed him everywhere, about the dreams he used to have before hunger kept him from sleep. He even laughed once, a quick, sudden burst that startled both of them. The cowboy listened, letting the boy's words fill the air the way birdsong fills a valley. He did not interrupt. He knew that sometimes the most important gift a man can give is simply space for another's voice. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking miles of open country. The boy gasped at the sight to an endless stretch of grass and sky that made him feel both small and infinite at once. He turned, his eyes wide. Is it all ours, just for today? The cowboy smiled faintly. For today, it is. The boy leaned back against him, quiet, as though he wanted to hold the moment longer than breath would allow. And, for the first time in years, the cowboy felt something stir in him, not grief, not anger, but the fragile beginnings of hope. The trail stretched wide under the afternoon sun. Its dust rose in little spirals behind a horse's hooves, fading quickly into the dry air. The cowboy rode with the boy pressed close against him, the rhythm of the ride steady, almost like a heartbeat. To anyone watching, they could have been kin. To themselves, they were still strangers, bound by the fragile thread of a promise. Just one day. But sometimes, a single day holds more weight than all the years before it. The boy had grown quieter as they rode, not out of fear, but out of comfort. Silence no longer meant loneliness. Sit meant belonging, if only for a moment. Every so often, he'd glance back to see if the cowboy was still there. And every time, he found the man's steady eyes watching the horizon, hands firm on the reins. That constancy was a kind of language. They stopped at a small trading post before sunset. It was nothing more than a crooked shack with a hitching rail and a tired old man selling salt, flour, and coffee beans. The boy's eyes darted toward the jars of candy on the counter, bright, glassy marbles of sugar that glowed in the dim light. He didn't ask. Children who've known hunger don't ask for sweetness. They learn not to. The cowboy noticed anyway. He dropped a coin on the counter, the sound sharp and final, and slid to pieces into the boy's hand. The child froze, staring at them as if they might dissolve before he could taste them. Then, slowly, he placed one in his mouth, the other clutched tight in his palm as though saving it for a moment when he might need joy more than food. The cowboy said nothing. He only watched, remembering a time when his own daughter, had she lived, might have smiled that same way. By evening, they found shelter in an abandoned barn. The roof leaked in places, but it kept the wind at bay. The boy helped gather straw for bedding, his small body moving with eager purpose. The cowboy built another fire in a rusted tin barrel, its flames casting flickering shadows on the wood. That night, the boy began to ask harder questions, the kind that sneak out only when trust has grown deep enough to hold them. Why do people leave, even when they say they won't? The cowboy stared at the fire, the question pulling at scars long hidden. After a long silence, he answered with the only truth he had. Sometimes, son, they don't mean to. Sometimes the world takes them, and sometimes they just don't know how to stay. The boy nodded slowly, as if he understood more than a child should. He pulled his knees to his chest and whispered, I don't want today to end. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He looked at the boy, then at the doorway where night spilled across the land. He had promised only a day. Promises, to him, were sacred words carved in stone. But there, in the quiet of the barn, he felt something breaking inside that vow. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a worn pocket knife, and handed it to the boy. Its handle was carved from bone, smooth from years of use. Take this. My father gave it to me. Said it was for the trail, for when I'd have to stand on my own 2 feet. I reckon you'll need it more than I do. boy's hands trembled as he accepted it. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the weight of being trusted. That night, they lay side by side again. The boy drifting into sleep while the cowboy stayed awake, staring at the rafters above. He thought about the promise of a single day. He thought about the loneliness that had hollowed him for years. He thought about the boy, whose small frame carried more loss than most men could bear. And somewhere in the dark, a decision began to form, not in words, but in the steady beating of his heart. Morning came with the smell of wet earth, a storm having passed in the night. The cowboy saddled his horse, lifted the boy up, and mounted behind him as though it was the most natural thing in the world. They rode on, not toward any destination, but away from the emptiness they had both known. At a crossroads, the boy finally asked the question the cowboy had been dreading. When today ends, where do I go? The cowboy didn't answer right away. His hands gripped the reins tighter, his throat dry. He looked at the road stretching east, the road stretching west, the road stretching nowhere at all. Then he spoke, low and steady. You ride with me a little longer, till you're ready to ride on your own. The boy's breath caught, as though those words had pulled him back from a cliff he hadn't known he was standing on. They rode further, to hills painted gold by morning light. The boy leaned against him, eyes half closed, trusting the rhythm of the horse, the strength of the man behind him. The cowboy felt the weight of that trust settle into him heavy, yes, but also healing. What began as a single day was already stretching, bending, turning into something that neither of them dared name. And in the quiet, the cowboy realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in years. Perhaps he wasn't meant to ride the rest of his life alone. The land was restless under a wide, gray sky. Clouds rolled low and heavy, the kind that threatened rain but held it back just long enough to stretch nerves thin. The cowboy rode on, the boy before him in the saddle, both of them quiet. Silence was no longer awkward, it was full, like a song with no words. By late afternoon, they reached a small town. It was nothing remarkable. A scattering of wooden buildings, a saloon with broken shutters, a church whose bell hadn't rung in months. But to the boy, it was alive, people moving, voices rising, the smell of bread drifting from somewhere unseen. He straightened in the saddle, his eyes drinking it all in. The cowboy guided the horse to a trough near the general store. As he dismounted, the boy slipped down too, landing light on his feet. He clutched the pocket knife in his hand as though it was an anchor. A woman passing by slowed, her gaze lingering on the boy. She looked at the cowboy with faint suspicion, then hurried on without a word. The boy lowered his head, shame pressing on him like a shadow. He whispered, barely audible, "They'll send me away, like the others did." The cowboy's heart clenched. He crouched to meet the boy's eyes, his voice steady, firm. "Not while I'm standing here." The boy blinked, as if testing the truth of those words. He didn't smile. Children like him didn't smile easy, but something softened in his gaze. They spent the evening in that town, the cowboy trading pelts for supplies, the boy trailing close behind, never letting the man out of sight. When dusk fell, they left the noise behind and camped at the edge of the plains once more. That night, under another blanket of stars, the boy finally asked the question that had been growing in him since dawn. "Did you mean it? She mean it, when you said I could ride with you longer?" The cowboy stared into the fire. Flames licked upward, sparks drifting into the dark like fleeting prayers. He thought about the promise he'd made, that it would be just one day. He thought about the years he had spent convincing himself that he could carry loneliness like a badge, that he didn't need another soul beside him. But then he looked at the boy. Small frame carried more courage than most men he'd known. A boy who asked not for forever, but for one single day, in doing so, gave the cowboy a reason to keep riding at all. He set a hand on the boy's shoulder. Rough, but steady. Son, I reckon one day's already come and gone. But I don't see why we can't call tomorrow part of it too. In the next day, in the next, as long as you want. The boy's lips parted, a soundless gasp, as though the weight of those words was too much to carry all at once. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking when he whispered, "Then, I ain't alone anymore." The cowboy shook his head softly. "Not anymore. Not ever again." The boy leaned against him, his small body trembling with a relief that was heavier than any grief. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that home wasn't a place, it was a person who stayed. Dawn came slow the next morning, painting the world in gold. The cowboy saddled the horse, lifted the boy into place, and mounted. Behind him, they rode west, the horizon stretching wide an endless dot to any passerby. They looked like just another cowboy and a child sharing a trail. But to them, it was everything. Proof that sometimes a single day can change the course of a life. The boy had asked for adoption for just one day, but the cowboy had given him something more. A father, a home, a tomorrow that stretched farther than the horizon. And as the horse carried them into the light, neither of them looked back, because the day they shared had never truly ended. It had only just begun.